New waitress exposes rude CEO, an amazing story of courage transforms their workplace forever. At the bustling diner where Sarah poured steaming cups of coffee, the air was thick with laughter and the sizzle of bacon on the griddle. It was a comforting place, filled with families and familiar faces. But the clink of glasses and chatter faded when Richard, the impeccably dressed CEO, walked in. The diner buzzed with whispers, instantly tense under his icy gaze. The contrast between his tailored suit and the diner's cozy appeal felt like a statement. As he made a disparaging remark about the menu's simplicity, Sarah's heart seized. Her mind raced. Who did he think he was? In a small town that had embraced her where community meant everything, she felt no fear. She had put her dreams of nursing on pause to support her struggling mother and her younger siblings. It was a mantle she wore proudly, but at that moment, an ember of anger flickered inside her. The thought of his condescension stoked her fire. Did he know how hard she worked? How many hours she spent balancing trays while juggling responsibilities at home? Her hands trembled slightly as she refilled coffee cups at Richard's table, feeling the weight of her coworkers' eyes bore into her, their unspoken support resonating in the air. They had all encountered dismissive customers, men like him who dismissed their hard work as insignificant. Richard's comments triggered something deeper, forcing her to reckon with her own resentment. She was tired of being judged at the diner, tired of feeling small just because she didn't wear a suit. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the day grew hotter, so did Sarah's anger. Her co-workers leaned in, their stories of Richard's company, rife with toxic culture, echoed in her mind. Muffled voices of support fueled her resolve. It was more than just a job, it was a fight for dignity. The weight of her family's needs pressed on her like a brick wall, yet the strong sense of injustice stirred within her. She knew speaking against Richard could jeopardize everything she'd worked for. The tension peaked as Sarah's resolve stiffened. Did she risk her livelihood for a chance to confront him? The thought sent shivers down her spine. She felt trapped between fear and a burning desire for justice. As she meticulously compiled evidence against Richard's company, she could feel anxiety rising like bile in her throat. Every moment she worked brought with it the gnawing dread. What if she lost this job? What if her family suffered? The invitation to a corporate event came, and the stakes soared. Confronting Richard meant risking not only her stability but her entire family's survival. The cacophony of the diner paled in comparison to the storm brewing inside her. Determination wrestled against despair. Would speaking up bring her the relief she craved, or would it lead her further into a trap that would lose her everything? As she stood on the precipice of her courage, she knew she had to take a leap. But what if she failed? The thought of her quiet life shattering under the weight of her words gripped her tightly as the evening drew near. In that moment, she understood the choice that lay before her: silence, sacrifice, or standing tall against a man who believed his privilege made him untouchable. The day of the corporate event dawned bright yet unnerving. Sarah stood before the mirror in her modest apartment, adjusting the simple black dress she had chosen for the occasion. Every seam felt like a symbol of her duality: a waitress by day, a determined warrior in the shadows. She practiced her breathing, trying to ground herself against the tempest of uncertainty whirling in her chest. In that moment of quiet, she could almost taste the sweetness of empowerment, but it was heavily draped in the bitterness of risk. As she walked to the event venue, the sun poured its light over her determination. Each step felt heavier than the last, as the enormity of her mission loomed closer. There were faces of her family etched in her mind: her mother, who tirelessly fought against life's odds, and her siblings, whose futures depended on her courage. No longer was she just the waitress. Today, she would rise from those humble roots to challenge authority that belittled hard work and respect. Upon entering the venue, Sarah was struck by the stark contrast of opulence surrounding her. The elegant hall was filled with laughter and the clinks of fine glassware, a stark reminder of the world that Richard inhabited. As she mingled, the chill of elitism washed over her. It felt like walking through a glass wall that separated her from everything she valued. Yet, she felt a flicker of defiance deep within, growing stronger with each forced smile she mustered. The opportunity for confrontation soon presented itself as Richard entered the room, commanding attention even among the polished crowd. At that moment, Sarah's resolve sharpened. She had more to lose than anyone in this room, yet she felt an urgency to speak up not only for herself but for all those who felt trampled under the weight of arrogance. She was reminded of the stories her co-workers had shared about mistreatment within Richard's company. They scattered through her thoughts, each tale igniting her anger, her desire to bring about change. As she approached him, her heart pounded in an irregular rhythm. She could feel the eyes of others glancing over, sensing the tension of what was about to occur. This was not simply a confrontation, it was her stand against the systemic inequalities these executives upheld. "Mr. Lawrence," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "I appreciate that you've taken the time to come here today. But I must address a pattern of behavior that has been troubling our community. Your company culture does not reflect the dignity of hard work. It needs to change." The words poured out, dripping with the weight of unspoken truths. Richard turned, eyes narrowing with incredulity. For a fleeting moment, an electrifying silence enveloped them, thick and heavy. Sarah could sense the challenge reflected not only in his expression but in the room bustling just behind them, people pausing mid-conversation to witness the confrontation. He smirked, dismissiveness etched across his features. "And who exactly are you to dictate the terms of my company?" His tone laced with disbelief, as if her words were mere air dissolving into the atmosphere. In that instant, every doubt she harbored about her decision teetered on the brink of collapse. The stakes had escalated. This wasn't merely about a moment's courage. Would she really be able to hold her ground against his unyielding authority? Her gaze pierced through the mask of confidence he wore, a mask that faltered under scrutiny. A nervous laugh ran through the crowd, but it fueled the fire within her. The moment of truth had arrived, and Sarah felt the tremors of a potential awakening, both for herself and the many faceless workers behind her. What awaited her next could redefine her journey forever. Could she harness this moment and turn it in her favor? The question hung in the air, unanswered and heavy, as both stood their ground, the silence looming between them thick with the promise of conflict yet to unravel. The tension in the air crackled as spectators leaned in, anticipating the clash between Sarah and the corporate titan standing before her. Sarah's heart raced, each thump echoing her resolve she could not back down. Emotions cascaded through her, a blend of fear, exhilaration, and an unexpected clarity. This was her moment to reclaim not just her narrative but the narratives of countless others who felt powerless. "I am someone who understands what it's like to work tirelessly for a pittance," she stated, her voice tempered with conviction. "I am someone whose family has faced the consequences of your company's decisions. I appreciate ambition, but it should not come at the cost of dignity." Sarah felt an encouraging pulse of energy from the collective gaze, her vulnerability transforming into strength. Richard's smirk faltered, confronted by an unfamiliar emotion: intimidation. "You're a mere waitress. This is the wrong arena for you." His words dripped with condescension, but Sarah saw a crack in his confidence. The room's energy shifted perceptibly, murmurs of disbelief rustled through the crowd. At that moment, she grasped her power. Her identity as a waitress was not a limitation, it was a vantage point. With every word, she reached deeper into the tapestry of shared experiences from her workplace, invoking the names of coworkers who had sacrificed so much for the sake of the company. "Do you even recognize the struggle of those who serve you every day?" she queried, holding his gaze steady. "Your boardroom meetings don't reflect the voices of those at the bottom, yet we are the backbone of your enterprise." Each sentence she articulated felt sharper, the clarity of her purpose cutting through the room's thick silence. Richard's expression twisted not in anger, but in the discomfort of someone suddenly facing accountability. For the first time, Sarah sensed that her words were resonating, stirring something within the invisible walls he had erected around himself. "Do you think I don't appreciate the work people do?" "I built this company on hard work," he countered, though she could discern the falter in his bravado. The crowd, once drawn in by his swagger, was now watching him with scrutinizing eyes, some nodding in sympathetic agreement with her stance. "You built it on the backs of those who barely scrape by, believing that wealth and privilege should insulate you from the reality of labor. That ends today." With her pulse racing even faster now, a realization struck her like a flash of inspiration: their conflict was symbolic. This was not just about one man's arrogance, it represented the struggle of a workforce silenced for too long. As she spoke, guided by adrenaline and purpose, the cloak of fear began to peel away, revealing an unwavering inner strength. Time seemed to suspend momentarily as she registered the effects of her confrontation. Whispers of solidarity rippled through the attendees. A few faces even beamed with anticipatory exhilaration. Could this be the movement she never intended to start but now felt compelled to see through? But while Sarah envisioned the possibility of change, dread loomed over Richard's reaction. Would he retaliate, or possibly acknowledge her perspective? Suspense knotted in her stomach, amplifying the gravity of what lay ahead. "Your position may hold weight, but it won't silence me. The time has come to face the truth: company culture cannot thrive on neglect." Sarah's expression hardened, bolstered by the determination to confront the injustice behind corporate facades. The moment stretched like taffy, a potent clash of vulnerabilities and arrogance. As Richard's gaze flickered with uncertainty, she realized that her confrontation might just set off a chain reaction for change, a potential metamorphosis not only for herself but countless others trapped beneath indifference. With resolve solidifying in her heart, Sarah poised herself for whatever might come next. What new revelations awaited her beyond this defining moment? The potential for a transformation was within reach, but at what cost? The challenge lay before her once again, just as it had since that first moment she walked through the door. But now, there was no returning to silence, no concealing. The time had come for her to step into the light, and she desperately wanted to know what awaited her in the aftermath. As the murmurs in the room intensified, Sarah's mind spiraled into an array of thoughts. The adrenaline coursing through her body dampened the tightening grip of fear, and she was acutely aware of every pair of eyes witnessing this confrontation. She had thought that once she found her voice, it would be simple, but the weight of the moment bore down on her. Each heartbeat resounded a mix of excitement and uncertainty. What if Richard retaliated? What if she opened a crack in the corporate facade only to have it slam shut again? In that instant, she realized how critical it was to remain steadfast. Each syllable she had spoken seemed to resonate with a deeper honesty she had longed to express. However, vulnerability and self-doubt skittered at the edges of her resolve. What if she faltered now? What if this powerful moment faded into another forgotten story of dissent? Richard straightened, finally shedding the veneer of arrogance as his facial expression morphed into something resembling genuine anger. "You think trivializing my work will change anything?" he shot back, outrage sharpening his tone. While Sarah braced for a volley of condescension, it dawned on her that his aggression stemmed not from real confidence, but fear of being exposed for having overlooked the very people who built his empire. But she couldn't let him deflect the conversation. Finding an inner reservoir of courage, she pressed onward. "I'm not trivializing anything. I'm recognizing the reality you choose to ignore. It's time you acknowledged that the people you dismiss are exactly what your business relies on." As she spoke, she focused on the faces in the crowd. Some were nodding, others looked contemplative, wrestling with the truth she was laying bare. Each nodded approval within her gave her strength, and she took another breath, anchoring herself in the conviction of her words. "We deserve respect, proper wages, and a seat at the table where decisions are made. You can't continue with a culture built on exclusion without facing the consequences," she continued, her voice rising. Feeling the shift in momentum, she recognized that something monumental was unfolding. She had become a conduit for their frustrations, their aspirations. But with that realization came the weight of responsibility. How could she galvanize a community that felt powerless without actually forming one herself in the process? Yet, before Sarah could finish that mental thread, Richard exploded. "You've taken a personal affront to my character. Do you really think a company can successfully run on emotional whimsy? His brow furrowed, eyes glinting dangerously, challenging her to back down. Every instinct screamed for her to cower, to take a step back, but somewhere deep within, her resolve crystallized a revelation that readiness was already part of her. She had the ability to influence a culture that had operated unchallenged for too long, not merely by fighting against it, but by redefining its core values. I think genuine empathy can disrupt the complacency of profit-driven motives. It can transform rigid structures into something human, she asserted. The truth of it resonated, filling the air with stale hope mixed with urgency, a bounce in her tone she didn't know she had. Richard shrugged her off, raising an arrogant eyebrow. This is not how corporate matters operate, he declared dismissively, but there was a quiver, a hint of uncertainty breaking through his confidence. As the room held its breath, the weight of the moment sank in deeper. Sarah realized that confronting Richard was only one part of the journey. The next layer would require her to thoughtfully consider how to channel this energy into a force for meaningful change. The taste of victory was suddenly close, yet it was tinged with a recognition that confrontation led nowhere if it didn't spark openness. With her nerves sizzling, she knew she must keep this moment alive. The first steps must involve organizing her thoughts, compiling dialogues of her colleagues, shaping them into a manifesto for change. But in the back of her mind, a question lingered: could she find the pathways to not only rally her fellow workers but also engage Richard in a true conversation about their worth? She had stepped into the spotlight, but would the shadows envelop her now, or would they light a new path forward? With uncertainty shrouding her burgeoning hope, she took a deep breath, preparing for what lay ahead. Sarah felt the room shift beneath her as the confrontation lingered in the air like a charged storm waiting to break. The energy clung to her, both daunting and invigorating. With adrenaline still surging through her veins, she couldn't grasp what might come next. Richard's dismissive attitude grated against the courage she had just summoned. It was more than a corporate spat, it was a reflection of the very nature of their workplace. She glanced around, meeting the eyes of her colleagues, who wore an array of expressions, some empathetic, others skeptical. They were looking to her for direction, and in that moment, she realized she had a unique opportunity. This was not just about her anymore, this was about them. Sarah inhaled sharply, her thoughts racing. How could she transform this moment of confrontation into a call for action? The voices of those around her rang in her ears, their silence amplifying the need for change. She needed a plan, a strategy to harness this energy before it fizzled out, converting their frustrations into a tangible roadmap for improvement. She calmed the chaotic flurry in her mind and began to outline her next steps, mentally jotting down ideas as if preparing an architect's blueprint for a new building. Gathering the right people, a diverse group who represented the varied experiences in the company, would be key. Their collective stories would create a powerful narrative that Richard couldn't ignore. But as she envisioned these meetings, another thought crept in. What if they dismissed her again? What if Richard retaliated not just with indifference but by pushing harder against dissent? She had to prepare for resistance, both from him and potentially from within her own group. Not just a voice, she muttered under her breath as a realization struck. I need to become a leader. Could she really step into that role? The notion both thrilled and terrified her. Richard's arrogance was a wall, but perhaps there was a crack she could exploit: his fear of losing control. She would need to frame their campaign as one that benefited not just the employees but also the bottom line, appealing to the profit-centric motives he clung to with such ferocity. An alliance with her peers turned into a strategy session that could redefine their workplace norms. With renewed determination, she took her phone from her pocket, tapping out a quick message to a few trusted colleagues. Let us meet after work. I have an idea I want to discuss about how we can present our case. She hit send, feeling the weight of their future resting in her hands, while the prospect of gathering support kindled a flame of hope within her. She couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her thoughts. The uncertainty loomed again. What if it wasn't just about Richard? What if their own internalized fears held them back more than any corporate cycle of indifference? Would they be ready to confront not just Richard, but the stumbling blocks within themselves? Turning her attention back to the meeting, she fought the doubts creeping in. The room remained tense, the stakes elevated. The moment lingered, amplified by the realization that this would be the crucible for her growth, a test she never expected to face. New dimensions of leadership beckoned her: vulnerability, empathy, and courage all had to intertwine in one cohesive approach. As the tension snapped, Richard's snickering voice broke through her thoughts. "I hope you have more than just resentment on your agenda," he sneered, and that twisted motivation sent a fresh wave of resolve coursing through her. Every word was a challenge, every dismissal transformed into fuel. She squared her shoulders, ready to confront Richard not just as an adversary, but as a catalyst for monumental change. Within her rose a tension between hope and fear. She would not merely gather voices, she would craft a movement that required confronting her own limits. The true battle was only beginning. What would it take to turn this spark into a flame that could drive them forward? And as Sarah prepared for the unknown, the path before her unfolded with both promise and peril. As she stepped into the next phase of her journey, she felt the trembling edges of possibility ignite. Would their stories coalesce into a powerful manifesto, or would they remain mere whispers beneath a hardened exterior? Sarah stared blankly at the computer screen, the flickering cursor mirroring the hesitation within her. The meeting she had hastily arranged loomed like a monolith, a situation burgeoning with potential yet infused with dread. They would gather in that small conference room, but would it be filled with passionate voices or mere echoes of the past? In that moment, she wrestled with her growing impatience as she awaited the arrival of her colleagues. Were her expectations too lofty? The stakes felt inordinate, their personal and professional identities hanging in the balance. Doubt gnawed at her resolve. Her phone buzzed with messages of agreement. Colleen was in, and so was Ben. Their support tempered her fervor, but worry still wrapped around her heart. Squeezing tight, turning toward the window, she watched the bustling street below. Cars formed a steady stream, each vehicle a symbol of pursuit and ambition. Just outside, the world pulsed with action, while she remained poised at a precipice. She longed to join that movement, to be a catalyst of change, and yet the weight of Richard's dismissive laughter echoed ominously in her ears. The meeting began, and as her colleagues settled into their seats, Sarah attempted to project confidence. Seizing the moment, she leaned forward and greeted them with a determined smile. "Thanks for coming, everyone. I know it's big to ask for your time, but we need to take a stand." Ben shifted in his seat, skepticism etched on his brow. "What exactly are you proposing, Sarah? How can we convince Richard?" He's not easily swayed. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? The reality of confronting not just a colleague but an entrenched corporate culture was daunting. "It starts with us telling our stories," she replied, searching their faces for understanding. "We can show him that our experiences matter, that we want to shape the direction of this company." Colleen spoke up. "But the last time we tried to present our concerns, it felt like talking to a wall. He didn't listen at all." "I know," Sarah acknowledged, a fission of frustration sparking within her. "But if we rally together, if we frame our issues through the lens of profitability and productivity, move it from our grievances to their advantages, we can break through." The silence in the room thickened, an invisible barrier formed by their self-doubt sinking heavily onto the table. She could see it, a flicker of hope mingled with disbelief in their eyes. The question remained, could she lift that weight? "That's a bold strategy," Colleen ventured, her voice tentative yet laced with a glimmer of interest. "But what if Richard retaliates? We could lose our jobs or be sidelined even more." The fear in Colleen's voice resonated deeply within Sarah. It pierced through the bravado she had donned like armor. More than just Richard's dismissal, they were confronting their own vulnerabilities, the fear of failure looming larger than the prospect of success. "True, but staying silent is a choice," Sarah countered, her heart racing with the gravity of her words. "We have a choice here, to remain stagnant or to push forward." Taking a breath, she added, "I want us to frame our grievances in a presentation that juxtaposes employee satisfaction with productivity metrics. The data can be compelling." As they hashed out strategies, something ignited within her, and Sarah felt her courage unfurling behind each delivered word. This wasn't just about confronting Richard, it was about redefining their space and practices. They were drafting a manifesto, replete with their stories and data, ready to share with an audience that needed to hear them. It was about empowerment staring down the fear that held them back. Their discussion deepened, the atmosphere shifting from one of doubt to resolve, each voice carving pathways into the corporate fabric. Yet as the clock ticked, Sarah sensed the stakes rising further. Would resistance not just be external but internal too, a war against their ingrained hesitations, their conditioned silence? The hours slipped away, and by the time they wrapped up, determination had coalesced into a tangible resolve. As they dispersed, the fire in Sarah's heart had turned to embers, its light still flickering. Her challenge was clear, not just to convince Richard, but to ignite ambition within her own cohort. Would they all choose courageous engagement over silent suffering? Before she could leave, Ben lingered, a hesitant expression crossing his face. What if we do all this, and it doesn't pan out? Then we confront that failure together, Sarah said, though uncertainty flickered in her own heart. But we will have stood for something. As she stepped out into the evening air, a new determination settled in her chest. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation she had been preparing for. Stepping outside the walls of her own insecurities, she was poised on the edge of change. With every heartbeat, the rallying of her colleagues pulsed in her mind. How far could they push against the hardened shell of their workplace? The real moment of truth was still ahead. The confrontation with Richard awaited, and in the depths of her spirit, Sarah knew this battle was just beginning. Would their unified voices shatter the corporate apathy, or would they retreat into silence once more? The morning sun seeped through the office blinds, casting long shadows across Sarah's desk. She had arrived early, the quiet of the office amplifying her thoughts. The day of confrontation loomed heavy with anticipation. Sarah paced, recalling her strategy from yesterday. Could she really galvanize her colleagues into action? What if Richard dismissed their presentation as trivial? Each thought was a tightrope, something delicate and precarious. The possibility of failure coiled at the base of her spine. Would she be able to summon the courage to propel them forward when it mattered most? As the minutes trickled past, her determination began to wash over the doubt like a tide, shaping her resolve. Colleen entered first, her face etched with nerves. What if we're walking into a trap? Maybe Richard really doesn't care about what we have to say. Then we prove he should, Sarah replied, feeling her own pulse quicken at the call to action. Our voices matter. Ben arrived next, and his demeanor indicated he was wrestling with fear. He shuffled his feet, scanning the room as if expecting judgment. Is this really the right move, Sarah? We could jeopardize everything. His skepticism festered in the air, but it was matched by a burgeoning sense of purpose within Sarah. What's the alternative? Accepting silence? We've been sidelined for too long. It's time to reclaim our narrative. A flicker of enthusiasm ignited in Ben's expression, but a thin veil of apprehension remained. It's a huge risk. What if Richard retaliates? A backlash could end all of us. Retaliation is a possibility, but staying silent feels like surrender, Sarah countered, her voice steady. If we remain quiet, we're agreeing to the status quo, to our own stagnation. As they further steeled themselves for the confrontation, Sarah's thoughts raced. Each word they discussed would not just represent their grievances but their shared capacity for courage. They were not just employees, but advocates forging their own paths. Soon, the trio moved towards the conference room, Sarah leading the charge. The air grew denser with every step. As they entered, those flickering doubts within Sarah returned, threatening to siphon her newfound courage. The table seemed to loom larger, the projection screen an ominous blank slate. Richard was already seated, a man at ease in his corporate shell, his demeanor radiating indifference. The way he lounged back, fingers steepled, made it clear he was disconnected from the urgency that flared in Sarah's chest. Sarah and team, he greeted, his voice smooth but dismissive, to what do I owe the pleasure of this meeting? She felt the weight of their collective expectations surge around her. It was more than just her fight, it was there's a moment she had to seize. Thank you for being here. We want to discuss the impact of workplace culture on overall productivity, Sarah began, straightening up and fighting the nervousness that constricted her. With each passing minute, her nerves began to temper into focus. The presentation evolved from a report into a dialogue, infused with personal anecdotes that colored the logic of their stats. It was dynamic, her colleagues fortifying each point, bolstered by the sway of shared vulnerability. Richard's eyes narrowed as he began to lean forward, signaling his initial resistance to the unexpected emotional appeal. He attempted to disrupt their flow, introducing counterarguments cloaked in corporate jargon designed to distract and diminish their voices. Emotions can't drive decisions, Sarah. Numbers tell the real story, he interrupted, his tone condescending. Yet, at that moment, something shifted within her. Instead of undeniable doubt, Sarah felt a rush of clarity. But what you fail to see is that these emotions are attached to real experiences, real people who are tired of being just numbers. The atmosphere in the room thickened, the tension palpable as her words hung in the air. Their personal stories had transcended graphs and figures, morphing into a transformative force. Would this be enough to break through Richard's corporate armor, or was he determined to remain impervious to their plea? The moment of confrontation was now an intricate dance between the potential for change and the shadows of their fears. As Sarah faced Richard's unsettling gaze, she understood that this was not merely about the outcome, it was about forging her identity as a leader, standing at the helm of all those unvoiced frustrations. Would her lived experience and her colleagues' shared struggle be enough to pierce the corporate veil? She could feel the weight of history pressing down. What would it take to break the cycle of silence that had governed them for so long? The silence in the conference room was tense, a taut string thrumming under the pressure of anticipation. Richard's smirk faltered for just a moment, his composure shaken by the unexpected insistence in Sarah's voice. She felt a surge of energy course through her, igniting the embers of her resolve. This was not just about policy changes, it was about laying bare the emotional fabric of the workplace, her workplace. Let us not dismiss the human element here, she continued, her words now flowing with a newfound vigor. Employees are not mere statistics or cogs in a machine. We have stories, aspirations, and challenges. Ignoring those impacts our productivity in ways numbers can't capture. Colleen jumped in, emboldened by Sarah's assertion. We've experienced burnout, disengagement, and attrition, all stemming from an environment that disregards our mental well-being. This isn't just data, this is our reality. Sarah watched Richard's expressions shift subtly, a flicker of discomfort mingled with curiosity. He was beginning to grasp that his usual tactics to dismantle dissent wouldn't work here. They were armed not just with emotion but had layers of lived experience backing them. With every word, Sarah was carving out a space for herself and her colleagues, crafting an identity imbued with strength and legitimacy. As the discussion progressed, Sarah noticed the power dynamics in the room slowly beginning to shift. Richard's posture, once confident and dismissive, started to stiffen. The tide was changing. Each of her colleagues contributing, now felt like they were reclaiming part of themselves, no longer just waiting for validation but seeking it and echoing it back. But can emotions really guide our decisions? Richard countered, a hint of desperation lacing his response, attempting to redirect the conversation back to familiar territory. In this competitive environment, we need clear-cut strategies. We've followed strategies that overlook our humanity, Sarah interjected before he could gain traction. Those strategies have led to high turnover and discontent. It's time to adopt a holistic approach where people's feelings are not just acknowledged but embraced. Each rebuttal felt triumphant, an evolution of her voice and her stance, a translator of collective suffering and resilience. As they dissected Richard's responses, the initial fear that had anchored them transformed into a collaborative force pushing them forward. They were no longer voiceless, they were a chorus of conviction. Still, somewhere deep within, the nagging doubts lingered. What if Richard simply brushed off their arguments? What if their efforts withered under his corporate disdain? The stakes felt higher than ever, and Sarah couldn't shake the thought that they could be standing on the precipice of something monumental or could very well tumble back to indifference. Then, in a moment that felt charged with gravitas, Sarah met Richard's gaze and held it. "You can brush this off as unnecessary sentimentality, but I can assure you it's in everyone's best interest to address these issues head-on. For the sake of your leadership and the future of this company, I urge you to reconsider." With every heartbeat, she felt her authority grow, rooted alongside her commitment to her colleagues. The words felt like an invocation, issuing a challenge to Richard: either adapt or risk the consequences of dismissing the voices driving the organization's heartbeat. The air hung heavy with anticipation. Sarah sensed that the tide had turned irrevocably. Each breath counted, each second pulses with potential. Richard's expression hardened for a moment, then softened as his lips pressed together, pondering. Sarah braced herself, keenly aware that what happened next could define her future not just within the company but within herself as a leader. Would Richard succumb to the pressure, or would his authority overshadow their voices yet again? The currency of change hung in the balance, and Sarah had to muster every ounce of her emerging strength. In this crucible of confrontation, she discovered not just her voice but her power. What remained uncertain was how far that power could take her. Then Richard surprised her with a response that would reverberate for all of them. Richard's voice broke through the tension in the room. "I see your points, all of you. It's clear I haven't considered the emotional aspects of our policies as thoroughly as I should have. However, change requires more than a few emotional speeches. It necessitates strategic planning and measurable outcomes." Sarah's insides twisted at his dismissal, even if it was tempered by an acknowledgement. Did he intend to divert their drive into a sterile formula? The flicker of hope ignited by his words faltered. She needed to ground her argument in practicality, to bridge the gap between emotion and strategy. "Absolutely, Richard," she replied, her voice steadier now, "but let us not forget that emotions drive our motivations. A strategy without understanding can lead to more disengagement. We've experienced it firsthand. How many of us have felt unheard, undervalued?" She paused, scanning the room. Each nod from her colleagues fueled her resolve. Richard's brow furrowed, the conflict brewing in his demeanor. "So, what are you proposing? A series of workshops on emotional intelligence?" "No," Sarah interjected, a vision taking shape in her mind, "not just because it sounds modern or trendy. I propose we establish a task force comprised of representatives from each department to address concerns and prioritize mental wellness as part of our key performance indicators." The idea flowed naturally, each word building on the last, fortified by the weight of their collective silence. Alarm bells sounded in her mind, warning her of possible backlash, but the possibility of transforming their environment invigorated her. If we can hold ourselves accountable for our mental health, we can reshape how we operate. Let that not just be another box to check but an integral part of our culture. Metrics can involve employee feedback, retention rates, and a direct correlation with productivity. Richard leaned back, steepling his fingers, absorbing her proposition. The shift in energy was palpable. Sarah was no longer simply defending a position. She was catalyzing a formula for evolution, an empowerment that challenged everyone to participate, including him. "What is the evidence that this will work?" he asked, skepticism cloaked in a veneer of curiosity. In industries that have embraced well-being initiatives, Sarah articulated, organizations report reduced turnover, increased engagement, and higher profitability. You want tangible results? Invest in your people first, and you'll see your bottom line flourish. With each statistic she laid out, she felt her confidence solidify. Richard's brows knitted tighter, but what had been mere irritation was shifting again, revealing the faintest glimmer of intrigue. The discussion roared back and forth, each point resonating like a drumbeat, fueling Sarah's urgency. As they debated the practicalities, the dialogue unfolded organically, creating space for dissenting opinions while keeping the focus on collective benefits. It was exhilarating watching her colleagues find their voices, shaping ideas into concrete proposals, yet, beneath the surface, Sarah grappled with her self-doubt. Would Richard really accept a new paradigm? Or would he relent when the discomfort of the unfamiliar began to prick his sensibilities? She felt the clock ticking down, knowing the pressure was not just on Richard but on her as well. Each moment felt like standing on a precipice, her resolve wavering at the edge of fear and empowerment. Finally, Richard raised a hand, halting the fast-paced dialogue like a conductor silencing an orchestra. "I'm not saying yes to everything right now, but I am willing to explore these ideas further. I'll schedule sessions next week where this task force can present their findings." A wave of relief crashed over Sarah, yet it mingled with a trepidation she couldn't shake. What if this opportunity tilted the balance of power in ways she couldn't predict? Could she steer this task force effectively, or were the waters too deep? As uncertainty coiled around her thoughts, Sarah felt a surge of exhilaration. She was standing not only at the forefront of change but also on the edge of a personal journey. The coming meetings would require her to step firmly into leadership, to navigate differing perspectives, and perhaps to confront her own apprehensions. Would she forge the path forward with confidence, or would fear guide her back into the shadows? As the dust settled, she knew one thing: she had no intention of turning back. The next chapter of her journey was just beginning, and the stakes felt higher than ever. The weeks that followed Sarah's groundbreaking confrontation with Richard transformed the atmosphere of the workplace in ways she could hardly have imagined. With Richard's tentative agreement to establish a task force, momentum had ignited a fervor among employees that embraced new hope. Sarah stepped into this role, embracing her newfound identity not just as a waitress or a daughter, but as a beacon of change. The task force became her mission, and she approached it with a strategic mindset honed from countless hours of dedication in the diner. Each meeting was a platform where her colleagues shared their stories, intimate, powerful narratives that painted a vivid picture of their collective experiences. As they compiled data and testimonials, Sarah witnessed small flames of courage growing within her peers, igniting a spirit of solidarity that had previously felt out of reach. What began as a tentative exploration of workplace culture evolved into a compelling proposal that laid groundwork for systemic change. They submitted a framework that emphasized employee well-being, tying it directly to productivity. What had once felt like an uphill struggle was now a collaborative effort, strengthened by her leadership and the voices of those who had long been relegated to the sidelines. Within the company, Richard had begun to navigate a delicate path. He hesitated over certain decisions that had previously come easily. The initial resistance he had displayed transitioned into a more measured approach, one where he actually listened. With Sarah leading the task force and the groundswell of support from her colleagues, it became clear that the boardroom might no longer be a hollow space insulated from their realities. Sarah learned to harness her blend of empathy and pragmatism, spinning narratives into hard metrics that made a compelling case for change. Their presentations were electrifying, seizing the attention of those who had once dismissed their concerns as mere grievances. Each success fortified her resolve, but to truly comprehend her transformation, she had to confront the depths of her own resilience. One pivotal meeting saw Richard address the entire company. Sarah presented alongside her colleagues, their stories creating a tapestry so compelling that vulnerability morphed into strength right before Richard's eyes. As they laid bare the operational consequences of neglecting employees' emotional health, Sarah felt their collective power surge. "I realize now that the way we operated is outdated," Richard admitted, his voice trembling slightly as he scanned the room filled with faces eager for change. "We overlooked the heart of our company, our employees. I commit to implementing these changes and will be present throughout the process." In that moment, Sarah's heart swelled not only with triumph but also with the realization that every difficult decision she had faced, every risk she had taken had delivered her to this defining crossroads. She knew she wasn't just representing her family or her co-workers, but that she had become a voice for all those who faced dismissal in a world intent on silencing the vulnerable. Recognized now not just as a waitress but as a valued contributor to company culture, Sarah felt an undeniable shift within herself. The mission had morphed from personal survival into societal impact, proving that authentic dialogue could foster respect and appreciation. As months passed, their task force evolved into a sustainable committee, becoming an integral part of the company's DNA. Sarah blossomed as a leader, adept at rallying her peers and advocating for initiatives that increased employee satisfaction. With concrete changes underway, flexible schedules, mental health resources, and inclusive meetings, she saw tangible transformations emerge in workplace morale and productivity metrics. The once harsh glare of Richard's skepticism morphed into appreciation. He began to seek her input regularly, validating her influence within the company. Each acknowledgement made her feel more at home in her skin, and fortifying her belief that her voice had power. Standing before an audience of employees during a recognition ceremony, Sarah felt a swell of pride as she was awarded the Leader of Change accolade. Cheers erupted from her colleagues, and in that moment, she realized that the small ember of courage she had ignited during her first confrontation with Richard had grown into a blazing testament to transformation, both personal and cultural. As the applause echoed around her, she felt an unshakable confidence surge through her that was once a flicker beneath layers of self-doubt. She had conquered not only her fears but had established herself as a change-maker within a system that had been resistant to voices like hers. Finally, Sarah understood the essence of true empowerment. It was not solely about standing against the existing culture but transforming it from within. With each step forward, she embraced her role with clarity and conviction. Now was the time for all who had felt unseen to rise, to reclaim their narratives, proving that courage, when woven together, could dismantle even the most entrenched systems of indifference. It was a testament to transformation, validation of the journey that had begun in the diner with the weight of her family's struggles but now radiated a hope that touched every corner of their once muted workplace. And now, this is your moment to join the journey. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and make a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about this powerful ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see how courage transforms lives. Don't wait even one more second to show your support. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of standing up and speaking out.